Today let's talk about voicings. Now this is coming from two places. One is from a conversation with a student, and the other is from just some content that's been making the rounds these days. And a lot of them, so there's nothing wrong with the content, it's great content. And the nature of the content is simply along the lines of don't play chords like this, play them like this, right? Or don't play this, play this. Don't play this, play this, right? Or if you take the key of E major, don't play this, play this, right? Or don't play this, play this, right? And the idea is these alternate voicings make everything sound better. I would add to that. So I think that advice is great, but I would add just a bit of clarity to that. And this is specifically if you are a beginner. So I would not recommend those voicings to beginners. A lot of people might do that to not, I wouldn't say cut corners, but to make life a lot easier. But there's a reason why I wouldn't recommend that to beginners. Simply because when you take the standard shapes of the chords that you play, there are certain techniques and there's a familiarity that you build. Your hands kind of get set to the instrument. So there's a certain aspect of technical development that happens when you work on those chords that don't sound that great and are quite difficult right at the start. And not just in playing the chord shapes, but also in moving to those specific chord shapes, changing chords, right? There's a huge aspect of technical development that happens that comes only with repetition. There's some things that you have to learn, but you cannot be taught. And those things just come from experience the more you spend time with voicings. So I'll give you an example. When people first try to play the C major, a lot of times this happens, right? And that's simply because the flesh of their fingers on one string is touching or muting the bottom string, so you get this buzz, right? So what do?
We're gonna do.
You have to spend time with it, adjust your fingers, learn to play on the fingertip, and get a clear sound. Now this might look different for everyone's hand. Everyone's hand is different. For some people, like for me, if I play C, I kind of have to tilt this way, right? But for some people, it looks like a textbook chord diagram of the C major, which is fine. But you only get that with repetition and you learn to make those adjustments. And those come into play as you start changing chords. Now, if you are at the beginner stage and you find this too difficult after 2 minutes of practice,
There is now a level 0.
and someone says, hey, why don't you try this? Right? And you try this G major looking shape, and all you have to do is move 2 fingers down. But here's the problem, this isn't even a C major, this actually has the D note added in there. And if you take the D note off, you get the B note in there, so now that's a C major 7. That's a totally different chord.
Wow.
Right? Even this form of, or this voicing of G that has an F sharp in there, right? It sounds great by itself, but it's not going to fit into every context. So especially as a beginner, if you're playing these voicings, you're actually doing away with the original form of the chord, right? So this is very different from this, right? So this G major 7 is not an alternative to a G major and vice versa, right? So it's very important to understand those very fundamental things. Same thing with the E major and all the chords in the key of E major, right? They're not going to always fit in that context, right? That's one aspect, that the chord itself is a slightly varied chord. So if you're a beginner and that's the only shape of the G or the C or whatever chord it is that you're playing, if that's all you know, you're going to run into trouble when you start learning songs, because those are actually just the wrong chords. So stick with the fundamental chords. Help it, let it help you to build your technical ability. All right. And it takes some time and it takes some repetition, but that's just how it is with anything that you try. All right. The other aspect can be trying to avoid bar chords. Now, why would you avoid a bar chord? Bar chords are great, as we saw in the last video. And if you haven't, you should go check out that video as to why we use bar chords. But take, for example, if I play C major, and when I was growing up, I learned to play F. The first shape for the F chord was actually this shape. If you look it up, this is the shape of F that you get. But I learned to play it with the C note right above it. So this shape. And so you take C, you put your pinky in there, and you flatten your index finger, so you play the B and E strings together. So that's like a mini bar chord with just two strings. And this takes some time and development as well. But what's the advantage of doing this? You see, once you start getting comfortable with this chord, barring two strings is not a big deal, right? So you're already beginning to step on the path to developing strength and muscle memory to play bar chords. Then you take the A major shape. If you were to play the classic A major shape with a bar chord, you're barring now four strings. You're not playing the E, obviously, right? But your bar is successfully going across three strings and it's sounding good, right? That's great. A lot of people struggle with that. So now you have a successful four-string bar that you're capable of. There are a lot of things you can do with that. Right? All came from the bar, right? And the fact that you developed that strength because you took the time to stick with the basics. Take B minor, for example. Now you're barring five strings. Right? Now, granted, you're only playing the bottom and top strings, but you need the strength in your fingers to get the clarity of sound with those two notes. So these are things that you would miss out on developing if you just right at the start go to these so apparently simpler types of chords or even nicer sounding chords. I don't think there's nicer sounding chords. There's a right context to play certain chord variations. It's not like one chord is better than the other. You can always improve on the sound. That's for sure. But it's about using the right chord for the right in the right musical context. That's what these voicings are about. It doesn't make you any less of a musician just because you're using the simpler voicings, right? It depends on the musical context. Sometimes it calls for a specific voicing, sometimes it just doesn't, right? You stick with the basics and you're good to go. That's all that's required, right? So these kind of things will be looked over if you were to just pick the simpler shapes continually. All right. And now, so this is specifically from a beginner's perspective. I wouldn't recommend for a beginner to just go for voicings at the cost of developing just basic chord shapes and developing this um, consistency and developing skill with basic chord shapes. So I wouldn't recommend that for a beginner. I would say get these right and then begin to experiment a little bit here and there and see what you can do. Now, if you're at an intermediate level where you have these, where you're playing your four chord songs or you have your basic chords down, your chord shapes down, and they're sounding great, and now you're playing more and more songs and you're noticing musicians do this and that, and you're thinking, okay, how can I add to this chord that I'm already playing? Or what can I do to express myself a little further? I want to say something more. I want, let's say, a different sound, a very specific sound here. By all means, start exploring different voicings. See what happens when you play around, add or take away notes from the chords that you have. Then by all means, go for it.
Do it!
So as a beginner, what I would recommend for you to do is stick with your basic chords for now Develop consistency and a comfort with playing them before you move on to the other suggested voicings, right? Take it on a song by song basis, if you will, because that may even make more sense for you to understand why a specific voicing can be used, and you can add that to your musical toolbox for whatever you're working with.
Shoo, shoo, get out of here.